Hello and welcome at the ChessSteps demo lesson step 3. Today's lesson is about the square of the pawn, and I'm not referring to the square c5 in which the pawn in this position is on, because that's not a particularly interesting square, but I'm referring to an endgame concept that will save you a lot of time thinking and calculating during your game, but you will understand soon enough. For this topic, there's no specific prior knowledge necessary, but a well-developed board view would come in handy. And so I would advise to, before you start doing step 3, make exercise in the step 2 thinking ahead book, because that contains a lot of visualization exercises that will help develop the board view and help improve your calculating in your head. So yes, that's something to do, I would say so. Well, let's talk about the square of the pawn. We're gonna first take a look at how you determine the square of the pawns, and you do that by counting the number of squares the pawn needs to move to promote, in this case 3. Move that same number of squares to the side, and already you see a square appearing. The rule is that if the opposing king is inside the square, no matter whose turn it is, the king will be on time to stop the pawn from promoting, or it's not on time to stop it, but it will be able to capture it once it promotes. So we're going to take a look at that. In this position, we see the pawn on c5 again. We know what the square of the pawn is. It starts at these squares f5. If white were to move now, we're going to quickly draw the square just to make it easier for you to see. If white was to move now, black would not be on time to stop it. However, if it was, to go back one more move. If it was black to move, it's inside the square now. You will see what I'm talking about. The pawn is allowed to promote, but black immediately captures it and prevents the disaster. So if the opposing king is inside the square, no matter whose turn it is, it will be able to catch up with the pawn. Let's take a look at another position. And we do not want to save this position. In this specific position, we see a pawn on b4. Well, I already showed you how to determine the square of the pawn, but I'm going to show you a little trick that makes it easier. You just draw a diagonal from the pawn to the back rank and straight ahead. You connect those, and well, it's easy to see where the square begins. In this position, the black king is outside of the square, so if the pawn would start running now, it would promote. But let's assume it's black's turn. It will move inside the square, and see how the square moves, because now the square is this small 3x3. The black king is still in it, as it should, and it captures the just promoted. So if it was white to move, it would be too late, but now it's on time. In this position, we see the pawn on b3, and the square would be 6. Oops, that's a quick promotion. And the square would be 6 by 6. If pawns were allowed to promote like that, it would be impossible to stop them. So in this position, the black king is outside the square, but if it was black's move, it would be on time. And now I'm going to show you a little peculiarity, difficult word to pronounce. In this position, the square of the pawn seems to be 7 by 7. But since the white pawn is still in its initial position, you need to consider the fact that it's allowed to move 2 squares. So even though the black king seems to be inside the square, it is not. I'll quickly show you. I told you that no matter whose turn it is, if the king is inside the square, it will be able to catch up. But not in this case, because the pawn was on its initial position and the black king doesn't arrive on time. So when a pawn is on its initial position, we start calculating the square of the pawn not on its position, but we're gonna start determining it one square in front of it. Now, if black were to move, it could move inside that square, and as you will see, it would then be on time to catch up. Let's move on to the next position. This is a tricky position. We see a pawn on b5, a white pawn. And the square of the pawn is 5 by 5. And the black king is inside the square. However, there is a problem. And the problem is that the fastest route of the pawn, of the king, is blocked by the pawn on d6. If the fastest route inside the square is blocked, then the concept of the square of the pawn doesn't work, because the opposing king needs to take a detour, causing it to be too late to stop the pawn. So if the fastest route is blocked, the square of the pawn doesn't work. And that's something that you can use to your advantage if you're trying to promote a pawn. In this specific position, if white would start running immediately with its pawn on b5, which seems to have a free go, it would find that the black king is on time to stop it. However, black has a neat little trick, because it knows, white has a neat little trick because it knows the fastest route. It just blocks the route. Now black has a difficult choice. He needs to capture, because otherwise the pawn on d6 will promote. And suddenly there's a problem on d6, because the fastest route is blocked. We need to take a detour with black, and suddenly we promote. So you can use the concept of the fastest route inside the square of the pawn to your advantage. Let's move on. Sometimes the opposing king is already inside the square of the pawn, as is the case here. But since the pawn is going to move, the square of the pawn is going to move as well. And we can use our own king to stop the opposing king from entering the future square of the pawn. In this case, we could move our king to b6. We know that if the pawn moves to a6, this is the square of the pawn. If the pawn is on a6. So black needs to find a way to get inside the square of the pawn, because if the pawn would move right now, black would be unable to stop it. So black tries to find a loophole. However, white shields off again using its king. And now there's no means for black to get inside the future square of the pawn. So it can't stop promotion. It helplessly is seeing the pawn promote. So you can use your king to shield off the enemy king. Two pawns combined together can also do a neat little trick. In this case, it's black to move. If it was white to move, it would simply capture both pawns. But in this case, they can help each other. Even though the pawn on h4 is not protected, if white would catch it, it would not be on time to stop the other pawn. So white needs to make a waiting move. It goes to g2, preventing the pawns from progressing any further. And now black makes a nice little waiting move. White needs to choose again. Well, let's say it goes to f3, and we move the pawn again. And again, it's the same idea. If white would capture on f4, pawn on h3 would advance, and there would be no time for white to catch up again. So it needs to do a waiting move again. We're going to move a little bit closer. And if this is a position, we need to move our pawn again, because if white goes after the other one, it suddenly has a big problem, because it can't stop the pawn on f2 from promoting. Neat little trick, right? Let's move on. In this position, the black king is inside the square of the pawn. And our own king is too far away to shield it. So in this position, our king is not going to shield off the enemy king, but it's going to assist its own pawn from promoting by just simply walking along. Well, right here, it really assists the pawn on b7 to its promotion square, and there's not a thing a black can do about it. Neat, right? I like those little tricks that chess offers. In this position, if we take a quick look, we see that running with the pawn on f4 doesn't make sense, because white simply captures it. So I want to urge you not to move your pawn too quickly. Now again, we're going to do some assisting here. And we know that our pawn needs to pass these squares. And by placing our king on e2, we ensure the fact that it can actually do pass without being endangered. Because now, white just makes useless moves and we promote to a queen. So make sure you don't move your pawn too quickly, because sometimes you can use your king to help it. This is a difficult exercise. It's one of the first exercises in your workbook. We're going to quickly determine the square of the pawn, one square in front of it, because the pawn is on its initial position. Did you remember that? I guess I bet you didn't. So this is the square of the pawn. The black king is inside it. Before we start calculating, we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. We already answered question 1. Is the opposing king inside the square of the pawn? Yes, it is. Okay, so we can't start running with a pawn because the black king will simply capture it. Next question. Can we assist our pawn? Well, that's gonna be difficult because our king is too far away. What we can do, however, there's one more step we need to take. Is there an obstacle in the way? Well, there isn't. Also something you need to take into account. But in this specific position, we can use our king to shield off the opposing king. Note that if the pawn moves to a4, the square of the pawn would be this square. Oops, sorry, that's my bad. If the pawn moves to a4, the square of the pawn would be right here. So black tries to find a loophole to still get inside. It tries to go through this route, but white prevents it from happening. And now black doesn't have a useful move to make. It moves to a b2, for instance, and it has to say bye-bye to the pawn because it can't stop it from promoting. So, in summary, I showed you a couple of things. I showed you the square of the pawn and how you can determine it by drawing a diagonal to the back rank. I showed you that if the enemy king is inside the square of the pawn, it will always stop the pawn from promoting, unless the fastest route is blocked by an obstacle, and you can use it to your advantage by placing an obstacle. I showed you that you can use your own king to shield off an enemy king, and I showed you that you can assist your own pawn with promoting by simply walking along. Some important themes that will help you to calculate and value endgame positions a lot better, and in the end will win you a lot of games. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you at the next lesson. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.